Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to your Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee. I am joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Martinez, Ryu, and Rodriguez. Mr. Buscaino will not be joining us today. What I'd like to do is we'll take general public comment at this. Well, actually, we'll do multiple comment cards and general public comment up front. And then, colleagues, I'm going to ask that we move item 5 on consent and that we continue items 1 and 2. The CAO has indicated that they're still preparing the report for items 1 and 2, so we're going to have to postpone that item for the moment. But before we move to that, we have multiple comment cards, multiple item comment cards from Antonio Ramirez. Ms. Ramirez, if you would come forward.
Thank you very much. Starting in public comments, please. The two worst mayors who have failed miserably are Antonio Villaraigosa, as known also as a Latino Chango gangbanger and chupanalgas, and Eric Garcetti, who both compromised the city of Los Angeles to a new low. We have a runaway crime rate, burglaries, theft, drugs, narcotics.
If you could keep the items to the things before this committee. Even though it's general, it's still related to the committee.
Right, but we're talking about gangs. We've got that with gangs, okay? So, again, families have been destroyed and destruction of young, innocent victims' lives also. These goddamn violent, evil Chango gangbangers and wetbacks who are not victims, but are perpetrators of crimes. Don't feel sorry for them, ladies and gentlemen. They're nothing more than reptilian lizards. Moreover, they are foot soldiers for the fucking FBI, the fucking CIA, the fucking NSA, and the fucking Department of Homeland Security, who put 99.9% of middle-class American people on the terrorist watch list. I'm on it too. Instead of deporting these uncivilized, undesirable assholes, and the globalist, twisted vipers use them as a weapon against American people. But don't worry, they are going to start killing them off and executing them and their families. So that's a good thing. And number 1. Does the Public Works Trust Fund, number 834, include how many wetbacks and gangbangers are unlawfully hired in the city of Los Angeles? Does the Personnel Department know of that? Instead of hiring United States military veterans, we have reptilian lizards who are taking orders not only from the Mexican Mafia, Mara Salvatrucha, Norteños, and Sureños, but other crime families. And number 2, the Public Works Trust Fund should adamantly stipulate to stop unlawfully hiring wetbacks and gangbangers and all foreign freeloaders, but to lawfully hire United States military veterans, whether they are active or inactive, uniformed or ununiformed. This is America. Quit fucking with the American people. Again, this is America. Let us hire American citizens. God bless America, and God bless Donald Trump. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. That concludes all multiple public comment cards.
Yes. Cards. I was trying to put one in.
You were trying to put a card in?
Yeah, because I'm here and that's why.
No, that's fine. Why don't you, Mr. Previn, why don't you come forward? We'll give you your multiple comment cards, and then if you would make sure to put a comment card.
Post facto, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. My name is Eric Previn. I'm from the 3rd District, and I caught your agenda quickly. I actually came down to speak about the $500 appeal fee ceiling issue, which is a different meeting. But I saw your agenda, and there's some good things on there, and I wanted to just applaud you for looking at limiting the restrictions on, or investigating limiting the restrictions on street sweeping restrictions near elementary schools. I think that the idea there is not to allow the streets to get bad, but it's to make it so that people are not severely impacted during times when they have to bring kids to school, which makes a great deal of sense, and obviously we appreciate that. I wanted to also say that in terms of the beautification and graffiti, I am always baffled how much energy we express in this direction for something that, is on the, we certainly don't want blight and graffiti all over the place, but I feel like if we were to somehow stimulate the artistic side of the individuals who are But what we're doing now is ridiculous. You know, we go to the metro station and we're constantly putting up plastic, and even if it hasn't been marred, we're taking it down, putting up new plastic with expensive contracts. So I don't know, you know, what the correct solution is on this, but it does really upset me. And finally, I just wanted to report, because I came from the county and I'm here now, and they had a report the day after Election Day, by the way. The election is over. I got 25,000 votes, but did not unseat Sheila Kuehl, big surprise. They had a huge meeting with Dean Logan because of the 118,000 people who were left off the roster. But the real story that was buried right after Election Day was the affordable housing report that they published on June 6th, which is today, the day after Election Day, which it's a heartbreaker beyond belief. You know, we have a shortfall of, for the lower and very lower and even lowest group, 568,000 units short. So we all like our HHH 10,000. Well, it's going to be 6, but we are in a deep, deep trough of difficulty with the cost of housing in Los Angeles and in California. So I just would say, you know, keep up the good work, and it was nice to see Rodriguez. It says a lot about someone when you stand up for someone like the former mayor who, you know, didn't win. So it's nice that you and some others were there for him. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, colleagues, and that closes multiple common cars. If there's no objection, I'd like to move item 5 on consent and continue items 1 and 2 until our June 20th meeting, as discussed prior. Seeing no objection, that will be the order, and we'll move to item number 3. Mr. Espinoza, would you please read item 3 into the record?
Item number 3 is a report from the Board of Public Works relative to the Office of Community Beautification continuing present contracts for graffiti removal and community beautification services.
Great. Mr. Rax, if you would come forward to the podium. And I want to thank Office of Community Beautification for all the great work. While this looks like a pretty straightforward contract extension, we're going to ask you to provide a brief overview of the current contract, share information about the RFP process for the next contract, and if there will be any changes in the scope of work. And please, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. Paul Roch, Director of the Office of Community Beautification, which is a part of the Board of Public Works. And we currently maintain contracts with 12 nonprofit community-based organizations and 1 privately owned company. And these organizations provide graffiti removal services and public right-of-way cleanup, weed abatement, litter cleanup services on a citywide basis. We're currently working off contracts that were first executed in fiscal year 2013-14, and as this is now past the 3-year period that the Board of Public Works is allowed to extend the contracts, we are requesting council approval to allow the board to extend them for a 6-month period, so from July through December, with a possible option for an additional 6 months if needed. It is our intent to go out to RFP on these services this summer, so we do anticipate having new contracts in place by January the 1st. We kind of got held up a little bit because of the prevailing wage issue and the issues that it presented to our nonprofit community-based organizations providing those services. We have mostly resolved the issues with prevailing wage, and we do believe we're now ready to move forward in the RFP process. We anticipate, again, having it out towards the end of summer, August-September timeframe. Last year, on a citywide basis, OCB contractors removed 32.3 million square feet of graffiti from approximately 475,000 locations. They also cleaned over 5,200 locations of weeds, trash, litter, and debris from along the public right-of-way and picked up over 16,000 bulky items. Obviously, these are services that we don't want to see a break occur, which is why we're requesting council approval to allow the board to extend the contracts.
Great, thank you. I wanted to ask you about one of the issues that and I know we've talked and my staff's talked about is we sometimes get in trouble with the jurisdictional issues where we do the graffiti along the river, but then there's a little section that that we don't do because it's a different jurisdiction. So my question is, have other entities contributed funding for the contract of services in areas that are just outside of the city's jurisdiction, and is that something we could do in the future?
You know, actually that's a good question. Just today, because it was River Day out there, I was talking to representatives from Army Corps of Engineer and LA County Flood Control. Those are the two jurisdictions that primarily do graffiti abatement in the LA River. Our contractors really do not go into the river at all. We'll kind of go up to it and do the areas around it. But we were talking about ways that we could perhaps coordinate better, so when we get requests into the MyLA 311 system for abatement services, that we could set up a way that those would be directly sent to either Army Corps of Engineers or LA County Flood Control. And they both provided me kind of with an email address where we can shoot those requests to, or contact numbers. So I think we are going to be able to do a little bit better coordination amongst ourselves. They don't provide any funding to OCB to do that work. They have their own service contractors that go into the river. And they mentioned, as I was talking to them today, about once a week they have crews that kind of just go up and down and remove the graffiti that they can kind of find, and then they do also have a request system where requests can be put in. So I am kind of looking forward to maybe working with them a little closer. I think it was good I was able to make a couple contacts out there just this morning.
Well, that's wonderful. I really want to, I not only want to encourage that, I want to formalize that, and I think I'll ask as part of this for a report back on the possibility of partnering with jurisdictions to either expand the contract or expand ways to partner on the services, because certainly in my district, and I'm sure my colleagues have similar issues, it's been a real headache, and trying to explain to the community why we clean this but not this, but this but not that. All I get is frustration. So you guys are doing great, and so as part of this, I'm going to ask for that report back. Just two other quick questions. Are the contractors that you have all in good standing?
Yes, they are.
And do the 14 contractors provide sufficient coverage citywide?
At this point, they do. Now, as part of the prevailing wage issue when it comes forward, this next 6 months is going to kind of tell us how that's affecting the overall performance, because there are going to be some changes as far as levels of payment that need to be made for certain types of work, such as water blasting or paint spraying that can't be done by the community service workers. And the way that we're going to be able to have an exemption from paying prevailing wage to the majority of the field workers is that they're going to have to move into a situation where they're primarily supervising the work of community service workers, whereas now, where they go out with community service workers, they are also picking up the brushes and the rollers or the chemical and doing the work themselves. And they're going to be allowed to do a little bit of that as part of their overseeing of the workers, the people that have been sentenced to community service hours. But they're going to have to move more into a supervisory role, and we're going to find out exactly what sort of impact that will have, whether we need to try to seek an additional budget allotment to make up that difference, or whether they're going to be able to keep up with the work they're performing now, primarily as supervisors.
Is this minimum wage or prevailing wage?
Prevailing wage. And the issue is that the prevailing wage for graffiti abatement has been tied to union painter rates. So it's approximately $43 to $45 an hour. Right now, the graffiti field workers are making $17 to $20 an hour. So that would basically, more than double the cost of the field workers if we had to actually pay them the prevailing wage rate. That would probably add another $4 million to the overall cost of the graffiti abatement program. As them being primarily supervisors, they are exempt from being paid that prevailing wage amount, but the impact that it might have on the overall level of graffiti abatement may be a negative impact.
That's something of grave concern that we're all going to watch carefully. Okay, Ms. Martinez?
So does the contract extension before us also include graffiti abatement and beautification services on our bike paths around the city?
Well, our contractors do not really work on the bike paths. Those are under the jurisdiction, I believe, well, it kind of depends where they are. Sometimes Recreation and Parks, sometimes Department of Transportation. So again, it's another one of those.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the reason I'm asking is it's my impression that New Directions for Youth, who is doing the graffiti abatement on the west side of my district, was also doing the graffiti abatement along the bike path. And so I have pictures, which I'm happy to share with you, of what it currently looks like. It's completely unacceptable. And so I just want to ensure that this new contract extension includes our bike paths, because currently they're not being serviced. And my understanding is it was supposed to, I've been told GSD was supposed to do some of this graffiti abatement. I was told DOT also has some sort of graffiti program. It's not getting done. So if it's not going to be included, I would like to look at an amendment to include it in the current contract, because my provider in my area was already doing it, was taking care of it, and they were doing a good job.
Yeah.
So I just want to ensure that I want to be able to add an amendment to the contract extension to include the bike path graffiti abatement and beautification services under the purview of the graffiti removal contract. Because if the provider's currently already doing it for me and we're happy with that service, I don't want this anymore. And no other department's taking care of it, and this is completely unacceptable.
Right.
I'm happy to share this with you. Maybe I can just give this to my staff. Can you please give this to Mr.
The
Rex?
agreement at that particular location is that the contractor, which was New Directions for Youth, would work in the areas around the bike path and provide the paint materials to a landscape company that was under contract through DOT that was going to actually maintain the graffiti on the bike path. As it stands right now, our contractors do not do any abatement on the bike paths. I'd be happy to look at what it would take to take over graffiti abatement on bike paths. Obviously, that would probably come with an additional cost, or whether that cost is extra money for them to buy have a crew that would be specifically dedicated out on the bike paths, or the cost would be less abatement in the neighborhoods because they have to pull a crew that's working in the neighborhoods.
I don't want to
onto the bike
overcomplicate this. The point that I'm trying to make is currently my provider, this is a service that somehow was being done and we're being serviced along the bike paths. I want to continue the same model. That's what I'm saying. So
Okay.
whether we have to go out and look for additional money, or we have to figure out a way to contract this out with, however the New Directions for Youth was doing it, I just want to make sure the work is getting done. I just don't want to get caught up in the red tape of what needs to happen, because it currently is happening, and I was very happy with that provider.
Okay.
But I understand it's going out to bid again, so I don't want to get in the way of that. My second question is, I'm aware that you're going to issue an RFP for community beautification services for fiscal year 18-19, but how are you preparing for that, given that you didn't meet your target last year?
Which target? Oh, our target for
Yeah,
the RFP?
right.
Well, we have the RFP prepared, so it's ready to go. What we were really waiting on is the final determination of the prevailing wage language
And so once
that we would be including in the RFP. So once we've been working with Bureau of Contract Administration, with the Office of City Attorney, finalizing the language that we need to put into the new contracts and into the RFP. Once we get that, and we anticipate having that, within the next month or so.
So once that's done, you'll be able to meet your goal this year?
Yes.
Okay. And so you want to talk a little bit about, I know the chair asked this question about prevailing wages, so I want you to talk to us a little bit about the process that will be coming in July for the prevailing wage part of the contract. Can you get into a little bit of specifics about that?
So when we do the new amendments to the contract that will take effect on July 1st, there will be new language that will be included in those amendments. And it's language that has been provided to us by the Office of the City Attorney that will basically enforce the contractors needing to adhere to the prevailing wage laws. They need to be registered with the State of California Department of Industrial Relations. They will need to have each one of their field workers that are out there will need to sign something stating that they're acknowledging that they are primarily a supervisor and not a field worker. Each of the community service workers will need to sign some sort of document stating that they are basically volunteering their time, whether they're volunteering it because they don't want to pay the extra fines or whatever, they are considered volunteers, and so that they won't be subject to the prevailing wage. The contractors will need to submit documented payroll records, which is part of the prevailing wage issue as well. So all of those items will be included in the new contract amendments. So it will be a learning curve both for Office of Community Beautification and all of our contractors over the next few months, just to see what impacts it has and how we go about doing it.
And are we going to be responsible for training every nonprofit or graffiti provider so that we can be assured that the paperwork is being filed correctly? Is that something we're going to take on, or
Yeah, we will absolutely be working
to make
with,
sure everyone's in compliance?
right, absolutely be working with the contractors, make sure they have a good understanding about what that means for their field workers, making sure that everyone has signed the proper documentation, that they are submitting records they need to submit to the city or holding on to those records.
Very well. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay,
And if you can
thank
just
you.
help me out with how to figure
Appreciate
out how
it.
to keep my bike,
you always help
my
us
bike,
out,
my bike paths nice and clean so that people can enjoy them. I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank, Paul and Contract Administration and the City Attorney's Office for working to resolve this issue. I know part of the contract extension was a result of a lot of the work that Councilmember Martinez and I were working to assure that we actually had sustainable service when it comes to graffiti abatement. And so I want to thank you all for your help on that. Thank you.
Great. All right, so then, unless there are any other questions or objections, I'm going to recommend that we adopt the recommendations approved by the Board of Public Works, as well as ask for the report back on the possibility of partnering with other jurisdictions to either expand the contract or find ways to work outside of our city jurisdiction more collaboratively.
Great.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 4. Mr. Espinosa, would you please read that one into the record?
Item number 4 is a report from the Bureau of Street Services relative to the feasibility of limiting street sweeping, no parking restrictions on streets near elementary schools.
Great, thank you. And before we go to Mr. Gong, we have one public comment card. Mr. Bieber.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. My name is Jay Bieber, and I'm appearing before you as one of the co-chairs of the Los Angeles Working Group on Parking Reform, convened by Mayor Garcetti to make recommendations for improving the parking experience in the city of Los Angeles. Approximately 1/4 of the parking tickets issued in the city are for street sweeping violations. 30% of those occur between 8 and 9 a.m., and 50% occur between 8 and 10 a.m. We looked at various recommendations to better help residents comply with street sweeping recommendations. The proposal you have before you today is included in those recommendations, and we encourage you to approve this pilot program to adjust the schedule so that the street sweeping does not occur when parents are dropping their children off at school. In addition, we made recommendations to adjust street sweeping schedules so that the parking restrictions begin after the majority of residents have left for work in the morning. Rather than no parking restrictions beginning at 8 or 8:30 a.m., we recommended that in residential areas where a large portion of the residents must park on the street, the restrictions begin at 9 a.m. or later so that the residents don't have to move their cars before they go to work. I just have a little bit more, if that's okay. Our recommendations resulted in the city adding GPS units to the street sweepers to better coordinate their routes. The city now has the ability to more accurately gauge the hour at which the street sweeper is more likely to sweep the street. This should allow the restrictions to be scaled back from a 2-hour window to a 1-hour window in many places. We ask that as long as you're expending funds to adjust signage in the school areas, instruct the Bureau of Street Services to include in the pilot program an evaluation of beginning street sweeping at 9 a.m. rather than at 8:30 a.m. in residential areas with schools, and to consider reducing the restrictions from 2 hours to 1 hour. And
Thank
so
you.
that way, instead of from 8 to 10, they can go from 9 to 10 and then skip that school hour period and also help the residents who have to go off to work in the morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, now we could have Mr. Chiming Gong please come to the podium. And if we can provide an overview of your report and the pilot program.
Thank you very much, Committee Chairman. Good afternoon. My name is Chiming Gong. I'm with the Bureau of Street Services, and I am pleased to present this report back on this very important topic about street sweeping around our elementary schools. Staff has identified the over 850 plus posted routes that we have throughout the city, those routes that are currently scheduled to start at 8 a.m. And then of that subset, they've identified approximately 260 plus elementary schools that lie along those routes. What we're recommending is that we start with a pilot, a subset of this particular recommendation, in order to see the feasibility and how well it's going to work. Some of the figures that were reported are based on estimated figures that would have to be tightened up once we actually started off with the pilot and see how well that would work. That's all I have to say at the moment. With that, I'd be entertaining any questions.
Great. And so the 50,000, what would that cover exactly?
Basically signage costs and some outreach costs as far as getting the word out to local residents and stakeholders that, hey, Bureau of Street Services is willing to adjust our sweeping parameters, and now you won't have to worry about getting a ticket just by dropping your kids off at school.
Now, I have a question, maybe a naive question, but
Go ahead.
it seems like a lot of money to take up and down the signs. Is there a way, can we legally just change the time by putting a sticker over the 0 and making it a 3? So if it's 8 o'clock, make it 8:30, or put a sticker over the time, or if not a sticker, a metal bolt on something.
That's possibly something that could be entertained, but I'd have to defer to my colleagues at the at the Department of Transportation.
Tim Conger with LADOT. As far as the sticker goes, the signs are relatively cheap. The signs are about $10 a piece. So by the time we send the crew out there to actually go to each sign, it's really better to just go ahead and replace the sign. The sticker won't last very long. We'll have to go back again, revise the sticker, as it tends to peel over, especially in the hot summer months. And also, the sticker will not have the graffiti coating. So when a sign's graffitied, if it's all brand new, has the added graffiti coating, we can just clean it easily.
Yeah. Although with a sticker, you could peel it off and stick another one on.
We could, but if we have to go there multiple times,
Yeah.
I think overall, that since the sign's only $10
So,
we think it's easier to replace the sign for the long term.
okay. I mean, I'm just curious because it's $50,000 replace all those signs. And maybe, is there something in between a sticker and a sign replacement? Although you're saying it's $10 a sign.
Yeah, it's about $10 per sign to purchase. And then regardless of what we do, stickers or signs, we need to go to each one. We need to write up the work orders, let the crews know where to go, keep track of where they're at. Because as people challenge parking tickets, we need to be able to show when the signs were posted and when they were maintained.
Okay. Well, since we're probably going to refer this to Budget and Finance as the next step, when it does go to that next step, I'd like to get a report on the different financial options for moving forward with this great idea, whether it's a sticker or bolting on a different number, so we can see what that difference would be in terms of, because it may be in the long run it doesn't make sense, but maybe for a pilot it does make sense. I don't know, but that would be something worth looking into. And then I know Mr. Rodriguez, you got a question. I got another one, but go ahead. I know you're.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. What is the length of time that you're going to assess the success of this pilot?
We're looking at least a month.
Okay.
At least a month.
So if you're going to do it for a month, would it make sense for the areas that are going to be directly impacted that you just use the temporary change in parking restrictions just as we do when we are with, like, for example, filming or doing any of the other work that we're doing? Would it make more sense and be more cost effective to perhaps do it that way since we're going to test it for a month?
I think so.
Well, it depends when you say, I guess maybe we haven't understood.
So I'm talking about the parking restriction signs that we typically use, like, for example, when we do a special event or when we do any kind of temporary posting, if we're going to be piloting a shift in the street sweep, in the parking restrictions for a month, rather than going through the, the labor-intensive task of removing the sign, replacing them, ordering new ones, that we do the temporary installations of, what we affix to many of the areas that are impacted by the change in parking restrictions, and do that for a month. I know Street Services does that quite frequently.
If we're truly looking at a pilot where it's only going to be a month, then maybe we could consider something like that. A month may not be long enough because you'll barely get, it's once a week. You'll get the residents starting to get used to a time change, and if you said,
Well, that's why I asked, that's why
the long-term.
Well, I mean, now that I think about it, I mean, we're approaching the end of summer, or the beginning of summer, so now with the summer season through.
you're not going to pilot it right now, but you're going to pilot in the new year.
It'll be in the fall, yeah.
Right.
And
So,
we'll see just how effective it is.
and that's when it would make sense, but that's why I asked my first question is, how long do you intend to pilot this and assess the success of that program, number one? Because what I do know about the parking restrictions is it is directly associated with street sweeping schedules, is that the shift in the street sweeping schedule has a direct impact on all the other grid, on the rest of the grid on the parking, on street sweeping. So that's why I asked the question. I know this pilot is one piece of it, but what the implications are for the rest of the streets that are getting serviced within that grid will be directly impacted. And so that's why I'm asking, how long are you going to pilot it? Because when you shift the scheduling on one street, it has a ripple effect for all the other streets that are covered by that same street sweeper.
Yes, it will. Although our staff has been working along, throughout this time period to start at different parts of the route. So, the parts of the route that are away from the schools. And so it's not impossible to redo the entire route. Sure. I'm not sure that we can, that we're able to accommodate the earlier suggestion of shortening the time frame. That's a different story. Depending on the times of the year, we may need all 2 hours in order to sweep up all the debris, depending on the time of the year. So.
No, I don't expect that you're going to require a more abbreviated time allotted for the parking restriction. There's two recommendations here. One is that when, that you use the temporary signage rather than doing the permanent change of these signs, since it is a pilot. Number one, I feel like that would have been a huge cost savings, and I know Street Services does that quite frequently for every other special event that we do. But secondly, when we're assessing the success of this working out permanently, because at that point, when you determine that it is going to be a successful shift, then at that point, then we would talk about doing the permanent changes on the street signs. My other part of the question is the assessment of what the implications are for the rest of the grid that is being serviced by that same street sweeper. And I ask that question because I know that even during my tenure on the Board of Public Works, along Van Nuys Boulevard and so many other areas, everybody wants 6 a.m. street sweeping. We don't have the scale and the capacity to actually do that. That said, I also know that when you do change a street in and out and you swap them out, it's an exchange, because we haven't increased the number of street sweepers, and the age of and the conditions of some of these is why we also require that 2-hour window, because sometimes you have swap outs in service. So, I'm just trying to be very practical in terms of having this conversation. And most importantly, what I know will end up being a direct and immediate impact for many of the areas. And I know in the South Valley, they don't experience it to the same degree that we experience it in the North Valley. I only have one location along Mission College that has early morning street sweeping, and the balance of it is fairly disruptive to most of the typical commercial and residential corridors. So I'm trying to help find the best balance, but that's why I ask, all those.
No, the assessment period would include those so-called ripple effects, those downstream effects. What impact will shifting the 8 to 10 hour do to our 10 to 12 and also the 12 to 2 hours? Yes, no, staff is prepared to look at all that and see whether the Bureau is going to be adversely impacted by that or not. So that would be part of the assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering, how did you decide which routes adjacent to the LAUSD elementary schools would actually be host to the program? How did you decide that?
we looked at a subset of our over 850 such posted routes that start at 8 a.m. Approximately a third of those start about
So
8 a.m.
did you determine that based on most to least need scale, or how did you determine what that route would look like?
No, those routes are all preset from years ago.
Okay.
No, we already got a set schedule and a listing of all those routes, and we have identified that subset of the 850 plus routes that only
That were
start at 8
already there.
o'clock. Yes, they're
And
already
so-
in existence.
Okay, and so you're asking for 500 signs, so what real impact are you trying to make with 500 signs as opposed to, the 3,700 that are needed? What kind of an impact are you hoping to make?
Those signs are intended to simply be posted around the schools themselves, so
Right.
that parents can drop their kids off knowing that they are not
I'm
running
just
the risk of
wondering if
citation.
you should be, if it should be more than 500. I mean, it just doesn't seem like, you think you're going to have that much of an impact?
Well,
I'm
we
just trying
want,
to figure out how you're going to measure your success.
yes, go ahead.
Hi, it's Greg
Understand my
Spotts,
question?
Assistant Director of the Bureau. I wanted to just set forth that we haven't defined a pilot. We're looking for policy direction from you on that. What we've defined is the universe of schools that are currently affected by this problem that Councilmember Krikorian thought we should study. So we haven't developed a strong opinion on exactly what sort of pilot is needed, and we're very open to design something that suits your needs.
That's what I was trying to figure out. And so, since we're on this topic of schools, what are you doing about all the schools that are outside of the LAUSD jurisdiction? Because we have a number of those as well. What are we doing about those schools? Do we have a plan on how to engage those schools, or have we thought about what are we doing to protect all students,
At this
including the
point,
ones that don't necessarily go to an LAUSD school?
At this point, we did a limited study on LAUSD elementary schools, which is only part of the larger population of schools of all types.
Okay. That's it.
Okay, Mr. Rue?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is, if you move it to 8:30, it's still going to be a 2-hour street sweeping time? 8:30 to 10:30?
For the rest of the route outside of the schools, yes.
So the 1 hour, so what was the thinking on trying to shorten it down to 1 hour?
That was, I think, a proposal that was
Right.
mentioned earlier.
Has that been considered?
That depends. We would have to look at route by route. That wasn't part of our proposal at this time.
Okay.
We've never stated
It
that
was not.
GPS would allow us to shorten the routes.
So GPS.
Bureau's never stated that.
Okay, but that was not considered yet. Have you guys considered trying to shorten it to an hour? Because I know there were lots of talks in the past. There was no direction with the department, but was that ever looked at? Possibly.
There has been a lot of different expressions of interest in redesigning the overall system, but this particular report is very narrowly focused on whether, how many signs exist that would need to be changed adjacent to elementary schools. And we weren't looking in this particular study at trying to find a way to cover the same number of curb miles in less time, just to shift the time window so that people could do a drop-off.
From 8 to
without
8:30.
being interrupted, yes.
And would 8 to 9, shifting it from up to 9, would that make a big problem?
It depends on whether the motor sweeper has another route starting at 10. But one of the complexities that we see is, you have a motor sweeper operator doing 3 or 4 routes a day, and they're near each other. And so if you shift the first one in the day, later he or she may not be able to get to their next one. So there's a lot of complexity in the system, which is why we decided to suggest that a smaller pilot rather than a full-blown change would be better. But the nature of the pilot is up to the council if they even want to propose a pilot.
Okay. So I know, so this was, I know it was brought up during budget, and this was very narrow in scope. So I guess you could, if we directed you, you could look at possibly doing a 1 hour time as well as even shifting it completely. Has the department even considered why we don't sweep at night? I know it's probably an employee issue. Oh, in commercial area.
In commercial areas, we do have overnight routes.
I would just love to have sweeping in my district. So we don't even have that. Yeah, that's all your.
So,
We have
well,
many street sweeping. That doesn't happen in our district.
we could.
We would love to have that issue.
No, I think we have a lack of street sweeping in my district as well, and I think that's where the GPS comes in handy. And I know you only have limited amount of street sweepers to begin with, so love to figure out how we could expand your fleet service. But
I move that we send some street sweeping over to our district. We can take some of yours. That'll solve your problem.
no, but we could work on a motion at a future time. But more importantly, I like what the chairperson said, and actually what Councilman Rodriguez. But about, since this is a pilot, wouldn't it be more cost-effective for a temporary sign or just a sticker? Because at the end of a month, you're going to establish its effectiveness, and until you finish the evaluation, then if it is successful and you go more wider, you could do the permanent replacement.
I think that the policymakers could direct LADOT to come back with a variety of options and costs for a pilot, including temporary signage or temporary stickers.
Yeah.
Which is what the recommendation is.
Great.
But continue. Okay. So I think we're all, well, actually, before I get to the recommendation, just building on that point. So there's 500 signs. It's $10 a sign physically, but it costs basically it's $100 per sign to put them up under the current dynamic. And so the question is, how much cheaper would it be if we did temporary signs or stickers or magnets or something creative? So my recommendation is that we refer this to Budget Committee, along with the request that it include a report back on the different financial options, including, but not limited to, the temporary paper signs, the stickers, or some other way to bolt on a time change. And as you said, that may or may not, if 90% of the cost is the price of somebody going there and doing something, then it may not make much of a difference, but we'd feel better seeing that written out. So without objection, that's...
Possibly see if there is a map of the proposed pilot project areas.
Certainly. Is there a map of the proposed pilot areas already?
We haven't selected a proposed pilot area. We're just proposing the possibility of a pilot.
Okay.
And go ahead. So the question is, when would you put together a map? It would be after you get the funding?
Yes, although if council provided some specific direction on the nature of the pilot, we could then come back with a proposed map. Sure. At this point, we were just scoping the problem and proposing we take a bite out of it rather than attack it at full, so that we could control the ramifications and the cost.
Great. Well, I mean, I guess our main one thought would be that we would have the pilot would be in a few different areas around the cities with different, different conditions. Whether that's traffic conditions, income conditions, whatever it is that you look for a variety, so that the pilot truly is more meaningful. Any other thoughts? Okay, then without objection, that's the order, just to refer this to Budget Committee with the additional ask for the report that we discussed. Great, thank you so much. And I believe that's, Mr. Espinosa, are there any other items? I know we have to do one more. Any other items before us?
No other items.
And I've been informed, Ms. Ramirez, I guess it was unclear whether you had general public comment, so we'll give you a minute for general public comment.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the general comments. Again, I don't know how and why, again, we consolidated Public Works with gangs. It just doesn't make any sense. But having said that, we have a gang epidemic. Some of you are lucky you don't get to live in the gang-infested territories. I do. I'm with it night and day. as a homeless person who lost her home because of gangs. I fingered the gangs, and they took over my home. I ended up on the streets, and from then on, I've been terrorized, followed, stalked, harassed everywhere I go. Every room I've rented, every home I've rented, everywhere I've lived, they've gotten in. How? There's nobody in America who could help me as a victim of gang stalking? How is that possible? We live in America, for God's sakes. And I never thought at my age I would be homeless, fighting these gangs. But if that's my lot in life, so be it. I'm going to take them head on. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't party, I'm not a hoe. I don't do anything illegal. I simply prepare my statements and come here to help others from falling into the same trap I did. I blame the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and Homeland Security. So having said that, again, God bless Donald Trump and God bless America. May you never encounter this hell. Thank you.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.